Have you ever believed that God can use the smallest voice to spark the greatest miracle? When a 5-year-old boy claimed he heard a dog crying from inside the walls of his bedroom, no one believed him, until they broke the wall open. What they found hidden in cement stunned an entire town, and what happened next could only be described as divine. This is not just a rescue story. It's a story about how God speaks through innocence, protects through loyalty, and heals through love. If this story touches your heart, do 3 simple things to spread the miracle. 1. Comment Amen as a prayer for the forgotten souls out there. 2. Share this video with your friends and family, because who knows, someone might need a sign from God too. 3. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more stories of kindness and faith like this one. May God bless you and your family. Amen. The wind moaned through the bare sycamore trees like a wounded animal, rattling loose shutters and carrying the bite of oncoming snow. In the foothills west of Boulder, a dusting of white had already begun to coat the sloping rooftops. Street lamps flickered weakly under the pressure of icy gusts, casting long, trembling shadows on the sidewalks below. At the edge of town, where the roads narrowed and the homes became older, stood a weathered Victorian house recently purchased by the Parker family, a gray-blue structure with peeling paint, creaking steps, and a chimney that hadn't seen smoke in years. Its windows stared blankly out into the cold, glassy eyes that had seen more winters than anyone remembered. Inside, 5-year-old Noah Parker stirred beneath a blanket of dinosaurs and rockets. His tousled chestnut hair clung damply to his forehead. Noah was a slight boy with pale skin, large blue-gray eyes that often seemed older than their years, and a voice that rarely rose above a murmur. Sensitive by nature and deeply imaginative, Noah had always been the sort of child who paused to study ants or talk to trees. The move to Boulder had unsettled him in ways his parents hadn't anticipated. He hadn't made friends at preschool, and he often spoke of dreams that made his mother clutch her robe tighter at night. His room was quiet, except for the soft ticking of a plastic spaceship clock and the distant hum of wind. Then, as if woven into the very silence, came a sound. Faint, wet, desperate. Noah sat upright, wide-eyed, as the noise came again, a muffled whimper, barely audible, but full of something that twisted in the chest. He looked around the dark room. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within the wall. Noah slid out of bed, bare feet landing on the chilled hardwood. He crept toward the far wall, where a faded mural of stars and moons had begun to peel at the edges. He pressed his ear against it. Silence. Then whimpering again, broken and soft, like someone trying not to be heard. But it wasn't human. Noah knew that. "It's a doggy," he whispered. The sound paused, and for one strange moment, Noah felt the space between the walls breathe. A presence, frightened but listening. "You're stuck, aren't you?" he said, pressing his palm flat against the painted plaster. "Don't be scared. I can help you." Snow tapped against the window like tiny fingers. Somewhere in the distance, a train howled, and within the walls of a house long forgotten, something or someone stirred. Downstairs, Rachel Parker stirred her coffee at the kitchen table, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. 36 years old, Rachel had the posture of someone who had once been vivacious but now lived in a state of cautious energy. Her long brown hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her face, delicate features with high cheekbones and a slight under-eye shadow from many late nights, betrayed a kind of quiet worry. She had left her job as a children's librarian to care for Noah full-time after his episodes started 2 years ago, ever since the incident where he predicted his aunt's car accident with terrifying accuracy. Since the move, Rachel had noticed changes in her son. He spoke to corners. He drew strange things. Dogs with empty eyes. Doors that didn't exist. Cracked concrete and red walls. Michael Parker, her husband, was a systems analyst who worked remotely. Broad-shouldered, with sandy hair and a quiet, methodical nature, Michael was a man who believed every problem could be solved with logic and wiring diagrams. He adored his family, but didn't know how to fix what he couldn't measure. When Rachel told him that Noah had started drawing dogs trapped in concrete, he simply said, "Maybe he saw something on TV." The snow had started falling harder by morning. Rachel glanced at the baby monitor still set up in Noah's room, more out of habit than need. When she didn't hear any noise, she ascended the staircase with a cup of warm milk. She opened the bedroom door slowly. Noah was crouched in front of the far wall, whispering. His pajamas were thin and clung to his legs, his toes purple from the cold. Beside him was a plastic bowl of water and 2 graham crackers. "Noah?" Rachel said softly. He turned to her. "She's thirsty, Mommy." Rachel felt her throat close. "Who's thirsty?" "The dog in the wall." She knelt beside him, brushing his hair back. "Sweetheart, there can't be a dog in the wall. That's just not possible. She's scared. She told me." Rachel forced a smile. "You mean in a dream?" Noah shook his head solemnly. "No. She told me when I listened." Rachel's hand dropped. She looked again at the wall. It was just plaster, paint, insulation behind it. And yet, that afternoon, Rachel took out the drawings Noah had done that week. One in particular made her breath catch. It was a sketch in black crayon, a dog with sharp ears and intelligent eyes, coated in black and tan scribbles, surrounded by thick, dark walls. Above it, Noah had written in clumsy letters, "Echo is hurting." "Who's Echo?" she asked him at dinner that night. "The dog's name," Noah replied casually, spooning macaroni into his mouth. "She told me." Rachel looked at Michael. He blinked. "Is Echo someone he met?" "We don't know anyone named Echo," Rachel said quietly. That night, while Michael watched a football game and Rachel folded laundry, Noah stood by the wall again. "I'll help you," he whispered. "I won't leave you alone." The wall whispered back with silence. But he could feel her, waiting. The snow had thickened overnight, blanketing Boulder in a layer of white silence that muffled sound and slowed time. The Parker home stood quiet, its Victorian features almost gentle under the weight of snow. Inside, the warmth from the old furnace did little to dispel the uneasy chill that had crept into the house, not from the weather, but from the feeling that something unseen had been stirred. Noah was up before dawn, long before the heater kicked in, and well before the kitchen began to smell of toast and coffee. Still in his pajamas, the small boy placed a fresh bowl of water and a slice of ham from last night's dinner against the baseboard of his bedroom wall. He knelt in his usual place, pressing his palm to the mural of the stars. "I brought breakfast," he whispered. "You have to eat, okay? You need strength if I'm going to help you get out." He paused, listening intently. "You're not alone anymore." The wall gave no sound in return, but to Noah, that silence was anything but empty. It hummed with the presence of the creature he now called Echo. Downstairs, Rachel was sipping coffee at the kitchen island, her eyes heavy with worry and fatigue. Her gaze drifted to the stack of drawings Noah had brought home from school the day before, strange, dark sketches done in waxy black crayon. In nearly every one, the same figure appeared, a German shepherd, outlined in jagged, anxious strokes, encased in thick walls, its eyes pleading. One drawing had the dog's paw reaching out through what looked like a crack in the plaster. In another, the name Echo was scribbled repeatedly across the top in all caps. Rachel set her cup down and rubbed her temples. That afternoon, Rachel received a call from Anna Mitchell, Noah's preschool teacher. Anna was a slender woman in her early 30s with curly dark blonde hair and a kind but firm demeanor. She had taught at Meadow Ridge Preschool for 6 years and was known for her ability to gently coax even the quietest children into participating. She was one of the first adults outside of Rachel to notice Noah's strange sensitivity. "Rachel, I don't want to alarm you," Anna said gently, "but Noah's drawings have become darker. Not violent exactly, but very sad. He talks about a dog trapped in a place where no one can hear it." Rachel inhaled sharply. "He talks about her at home too. He says she's in the wall." There was a pause on the other end. "I know you mentioned he's imaginative, but this is different. Has he experienced anything traumatic recently? Or seen something?" "No," Rachel replied softly. "Only the move. The house is old. He doesn't like it. Says it's sad." "That might be it," Anna said. "But just in case, keep an eye on him. If the drawings escalate or if he says the dog is telling him to do anything strange." "He hasn't," Rachel interrupted. He just wants to help her. Later that night, Rachel brought it up with Michael. I'm not saying there's actually something in the wall, she said, folding laundry in their bedroom. But he's acting like there is. He's feeding it, talking to it. Michael was brushing his teeth. It's an old house. That wall probably backs up to the crawl space. Could be an animal under there, a raccoon, a possum. The pipes creak, the walls shift. Kids hear things. But he says the dog's name is Echo. No one told him that. He just knew. Michael spit into the sink and looked at her in the mirror. You're scared. Rachel met his eyes. I think there's something more going on than just imagination. To reassure her, Michael promised to check the wall. That weekend, he pulled out his flashlight and tools, opening the access panel to the crawlspace behind Noah's bedroom. It was narrow, dusty, full of cobwebs and old insulation. Michael crawled halfway in, light bouncing off beams and piping. There were no signs of animal waste, no paw prints, no fur. He knocked gently on the inside of the wall. Hollow, he called back over his shoulder. Nothing here but old pipes and air. Noah stood silently nearby, watching. When Michael emerged, brushing dust from his flannel shirt, he turned to his son. There's nothing in there, buddy. Just old boards. Noah didn't argue. He simply turned and walked back into his room, sat beside the wall, and whispered again. That night, Rachel woke to find her son's light still on. She entered his room and found him asleep against the wall, one hand resting on the baseboard, the other curled beneath his chin. The next morning, when she woke him for school, she noticed something new. His drawings had changed. The same dog, Echo, was still present, but this time, the wall had a crack in it. A thin fracture. From it, a glowing thread of light reached toward the dog's paw. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. At school that day, Anna Mitchell pulled her aside during drop-off. I asked Noah today what would happen if he couldn't help the dog, she said. He said something strange. What? He said, then she'll fade away. And I'll fade too. Rachel looked out the window at the snow-covered playground. Something had begun, and it would not be ignored. The snow had grown heavier, swirling around Boulder like a silken curtain of white silence. The Parker house groaned beneath the weight of winter, its ancient bones creaking in the cold. Inside, the warmth of the furnace did little to dispel the unease that had settled into the walls. Rachel Parker stood barefoot in Noah's room, her robe gathered tightly at her waist, eyes fixed on the star-speckled wall where her son now whispered every evening. She waited until Noah had drifted off to sleep before she approached the wall. The mural's chipped moons and planets loomed oddly in the dim light. She pressed her ear gently to the surface. Hesitant, foolish, she thought, and held her breath. For a long moment there was only silence, the sound of her own heart beating in her ears. But then, faint, so faint she might have imagined it, she felt a vibration. Not from the heating pipes, not the wind. Something slower, rhythmic. A breath. She staggered back, heart pounding. It couldn't be real. But what if it was? The next morning, after dropping Noah off at preschool, Rachel returned home and stood in the foyer for several long minutes. Her fingers hovered over the bookshelf near the entryway, where a stack of property documents still sat unopened. She finally grabbed them and settled on the floor beside a half-emptied box of winter coats. She thumbed through inspection reports, previous sale records, contractor quotes, until a faded folder labeled Historical Ownership caught her attention. Inside, typed in a now-yellowed form, was the name Dr. Edward Lawton, a previous owner from 6 years ago. She searched his name online. The first few results showed him as a former veterinary behaviorist, once attached to a university research lab. Then the entries shifted: forums, news snippets, speculative blogs. 6 months ago, Dr. Lawton had vanished without a trace. He was last seen walking into his home, the very house they now occupied, and was never seen again. Rachel felt a chill crawl over her skin. Later that afternoon, she visited the town's small public library, a red brick building tucked between a bakery and a barber shop. At the front desk sat May Holloway, the town librarian. May was in her late 60s, short and solidly built, with hair the color of steel wool tied back in a low bun and glasses on a chain that she frequently forgot were hanging from her neck. Her voice was gravelly but warm, and she carried herself with the kind of calm that came from years of weathering both storms and teenagers. Rachel approached her hesitantly. "Hi, I'm looking for any old records or local articles on Dr. Edward Lawton. He used to own our house on Timberline Street." May raised an eyebrow, flipping open her spiral-bound reference log. "That name's familiar. Give me a second." She disappeared into the archives room, returning 10 minutes later with a small folder of clippings. They sat at a corner table, lit by a desk lamp with a humming bulb. May flipped through yellowing clippings. He was a bit of a recluse. Taught animal behavior over at Northern Colorado University until he quit. Folks said he was brilliant, too brilliant maybe. But something happened. Rachel leaned in. "What kind of something?" May paused. There were rumors that he thought his dog was more than a dog. Said she could think like a person. Talk to him. Her name was Echo. Rachel's heart stuttered. "Echo?" May nodded. Big German shepherd. Jet black. Used to walk her around the block before he became paranoid. Said people were watching them. After a while, no one saw the dog anymore. Then he disappeared. That night, Rachel sat across from Michael at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. "I think something terrible happened in this house," she said. Michael, still in his flannel work shirt, rubbed his forehead. "Ratch, it's an old house. People disappear all the time. There's nothing that proves." She knew the name, she interrupted. "Echo." Noah said it before anyone else ever mentioned it. "How?" Michael opened his mouth, then closed it. Noah, meanwhile, had begun whispering to the wall more frequently. "You're not forgotten," he'd say gently. "I'll get you out." Rachel sat by him one night, watching his little fingers trace a line across the wall. "Why do you call her Echo?" she asked softly. "She told me," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "She doesn't want to be alone in the dark anymore." Rachel held him close, heart aching with fear and love. That weekend, she visited the elderly neighbor across the street, Henry Collins, a retired postman in his late 70s with a limp in his right leg and a fondness for cardinals. Henry was a wiry man with tufts of white hair poking from his ears and a way of squinting that made him seem suspicious even when he wasn't. He answered the door in a red flannel shirt and jeans held up with suspenders. "Ah, Rachel, isn't it? You've got the Lawton place." "I do," she said. "I was wondering if you remember anything about Dr. Lawton or his dog." Henry scratched his chin. "Echo. Big shepherd. Smart eyes. Used to bark at everything like it was speaking English. Then one day, poof. Gone. Never saw her again. Next thing we knew, Ed went missing too. Some folks said he ran off. But I think something happened inside that house." Rachel left with her stomach in knots. That evening, Noah drew again. This time, Echo stood behind bars, her eyes wide, her body pressed to a wall. Above her, a strange symbol, a circle with lines shooting outward like rays, was scrawled in thick black crayon. Rachel recognized it. She had seen the same symbol etched faintly into the stone in the basement, covered by cobwebs. Whatever was hidden in this house, it hadn't left. And it wasn't finished speaking. The wind howled like a wounded creature outside the Parker house, rattling the warped shutters and slipping icy fingers through the gaps beneath the doors. Snow had built up in crisp ridges along the windowsills, muffling the world beyond into silence. Inside, the house groaned, a long, tired sound that felt too intentional to be the settling of old wood. Michael stood in the dimly lit basement, a flashlight balanced in one hand, a stud finder and handheld wall scanner in the other. He was tall, solidly built, with short sandy hair and rectangular glasses that often slipped down his nose when he was focused. An engineer by trade, Michael preferred the tangible, the measurable. But even he had started to feel the cracks forming in their reality. When Rachel showed him the basement symbol Noah had drawn, etched faintly behind the old oil tank, he couldn't dismiss it as coincidence. The walls in the basement were uneven and layered with decades of poorly applied plaster. He passed the stud finder slowly along the largest wall, the one that backed against the northern edge of the house. The device beeped. Then again. Then nothing. A section the size of a large cabinet read hollow. Too hollow. He switched to the wall scanner and watched the outline of the studs appear on the screen, except for one voided rectangle, sealed behind the surface. Rachel stood behind him, arms crossed over her sweater. Is that normal? No, Michael muttered. That space shouldn't be there. It's sealed in. They both turned at the sound of soft footsteps. Noah stood on the top step of the basement stairs, wrapped in a fleece blanket, eyes wide and shadowed in the gloom. That's where she is, he said. That's where Echo cries the loudest. Later that night, Rachel returned alone to the attic, unable to shake the feeling that something in the house was waiting to be found. The attic door was stubborn and old, the wooden stairs creaking with each cautious step. She held a flashlight between her teeth as she pulled away dust-coated tarps and disintegrating boxes. Near the back, beneath a stack of moldy blankets and a rusted fan, she discovered a small cedar chest. Inside lay a series of leather-bound notebooks, yellowed with age. The cover etched with the initials Yell. Dr. Edward Lawton's handwriting was erratic, slanted in bursts of agitation. The early entries described mundane things, lab appointments, medications for Echo, who was frequently noted as responding well. But over time, the entries became more fragmented. Words like monitoring, surveillance, and auditory intercept began appearing. Rachel read one aloud, heart tightening. Echo's eyes flicker when I speak near the windows. I swear I heard a click behind her right ear. She hears things I cannot. She tilts her head like she's receiving instructions. This isn't just a dog. This is a device. A signal conduit. I can't let them hear me anymore. The last page was smeared and torn. No one will find her. Not where I've placed her. Cement doesn't talk. Rachel closed the journal, hands trembling. Meanwhile, Michael had begun clearing the basement wall. With gloves and safety goggles, he chiseled through the brittle outer layer. Dust filled the air like ash. As he scraped deeper, the flashlight beam illuminated something strange. Patches of poured cement unevenly applied over what looked like old brick. It wasn't part of the original structure. That night, Noah didn't sleep. He sat beside the mural in his room, speaking gently to the wall. It's almost over, he whispered. They're going to open the door. Just wait a little more. The next morning, Rachel showed Michael the journals. He read through the final entries in silence, jaw clenching. He really believed the dog was a transmitter? That it was listening for something. Rachel nodded. He didn't just lose his mind. He trapped her. Alive. Michael dropped his eyes to the floor. Then she could still be. No, Rachel said quickly. It's been too long. But Noah's not just imagining this. Something is left. An echo, maybe. Of her pain. Rachel returned to the attic and gathered the rest of the notebooks, storing them in a metal box. But as she moved aside another collapsed box, she found a photograph, water-damaged but intact. It was Echo, a large female German shepherd with thick, black and tan fur, bright amber eyes, and a posture that radiated intelligence. Her ears were alert, and she sat beside Dr. Lawton on what appeared to be the very front steps of the house. In the photo, Edward looked worn, with deep lines etched across his face, hair thinning and jaw tense. But Echo, she looked almost human in her gaze. Rachel brought the photo to Noah. Is this her? Noah looked at it, then smiled faintly. Yes, but she was sad when she got stuck. She didn't look like this anymore. Michael continued working in the basement, removing more of the false wall. Behind the outer plaster, he found a thin strip of discolored concrete, a hand-poured section that spanned the width of the cavity. At the bottom edge, he saw claw marks, deep, desperate scrapes worn into the cement. He stumbled back, heart hammering. Later, he whispered to Rachel. He buried her alive. Rachel's breath caught. In the stillness that followed, Noah's voice drifted from the top of the stairs. She knows you found her. She's waiting. The wind outside had softened to a whisper by dawn, the snow falling now in feathery drifts that clung to the bare branches like lace. Inside the Parker basement, the silence was not peace, it was breathless anticipation. The wall stood partially broken, the smell of dust and mildew thick in the air, and beside the hole crouched Michael, hammer in hand, face pale under the harsh beam of a construction lamp. Noah sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, his blanket still wrapped around him. His amber eyes, mirrors of something too old for his 5 years, stared fixedly at the space in the wall. He didn't speak, just gave a small nod when Michael looked back. Michael swallowed hard. With a steadying breath, he chipped away at the final corner of cement, and then the false wall gave way. The moment the last piece crumbled, a rush of cold, stale air escaped from the cavity. It carried with it a faint, almost metallic scent, like wet stone and old wounds. The flashlight beam flickered across the hollow inside, illuminating the narrow recess no wider than a crawl space. There, in the shadows, lay a shape that took Michael a moment to comprehend. A dog. No, not a dog. A skeleton wrapped in skin. She was curled in on herself, ribs protruding sharply against a dusty coat, one paw raised as if frozen mid-scratch. Her breathing was shallow, too weak to move or bark. Her eyes, once a proud amber, were clouded now, but they fluttered open at the light. She did not react to Michael or Rachel's frantic whispers. She only stirred, just barely, when Noah spoke. "It's okay now," he said softly, scooting closer. "You're safe." And then, miraculously, her ears twitched. Her nose quivered. Her gaze locked with his. Rachel gasped and dropped to her knees beside her son. "She heard you," she whispered. Michael reached in gently, lifting Echo with shaking arms. She was feather-light, far too light, her fur matted with concrete dust and old blood. But she was warm and alive. They laid her on a blanket and covered her as Rachel frantically dialed the emergency number scrawled on the fridge. "Valerie," she breathed into the phone. "Please, it's Rachel Parker. You have to come now. We found something. A dog. She's alive, but she's not going to last long." On the other end, Dr. Valerie Torres was already pulling on her coat. Dr. Torres was a woman in her early 40s with sleek black hair tied into a low braid, olive-toned skin, and sharp features softened by kind eyes. She had grown up in Colorado Springs and had been the town's most trusted vet for over a decade. Valerie had always believed in science and biology, but something in her heart had never lost its sense of wonder. Still, she was not prepared for what she saw when she stepped into the Parker basement 30 minutes later. Echo lay barely conscious on the floor, wrapped in blankets, and for already dripping fluids into her foreleg via a portable kit Michael had retrieved from Valerie's vehicle at her instruction. Valerie crouched beside her, gloved hands moving with trained precision, listening to the dog's heart with a stethoscope, checking her reflexes, prying open her crusted mouth. "She shouldn't be alive," she whispered, eyes wide. "This level of dehydration. The muscle atrophy alone should have shut down her organs days ago." She looked up. "How long was she down there?" Michael shook his head numbly. "We think 6 months. Since the last owner disappeared." Valerie blinked. "That's impossible." "She only reacts to Noah," Rachel said. "Watch." Noah leaned forward again, resting his tiny palm against Echo's paw. "You're gonna be okay," he murmured. "We'll help you remember." Echo's eyes fluttered, and for the first time, her tail gave the faintest, almost imperceptible thump against the blanket. Valerie's brow furrowed in disbelief. She's not just hearing his voice. It's like she knows him. Rachel sat beside the vet, voice trembling. "There's something between them. I don't understand it, but he called her name before we ever knew it. He talks to her like they've known each other forever." Valerie opened a small bag of protein paste and gently placed some against Echo's tongue. The dog weakly licked at it, and the room exhaled in collective relief. "We need to get her stabilized at the clinic," Valerie said. "But I'm warning you, she may not make it through the next 24 hours. Whatever this is, it's a miracle already." Michael helped carry Echo to Valerie's vehicle, careful not to jostle her fragile body. As they loaded her into the back, snow began falling again, heavier this time. Later that evening, as Rachel watched Valerie drive off into the storm with their unlikely survivor, she wrapped her arms around Noah, who stood barefoot on the porch. "Why you?" she asked softly. Why could she only hear you? Noah looked up at her and said simply, because she was never really gone, just lost in the dark, and I was the only one who remembered to listen. Snow continued to fall in soft waves over Boulder, laying a pale silence across the rooftops and frozen trees. Inside the animal clinic just outside town, warm yellow light spilled through the windows, illuminating a scene no one had expected to witness. A German shepherd that should have died months ago, sleeping fitfully but alive. Echo lay on a padded recovery mat in a quiet back room of the clinic. Her breathing was shallow but rhythmic, aided by fluids and careful monitoring. Her ribs, still pronounced, shifted gently with each breath. Her fur, now partially washed and brushed, revealed more clearly the patches of black and rich tan beneath the dust and grime. Her eyes fluttered in her sleep, twitching as if chasing something unseen. Beside her sat Noah Parker, 5 years old, his knees pulled up to his chest and a coloring pad on his lap. He had barely left her side in the 2 days since she was rescued. A child with unruly chestnut curls and eyes too quiet for his age, Noah no longer looked frightened, he looked focused. And what he drew was no longer Echo. He was drawing another dog. This one smaller, with a white patch on its chest and a curled tail. In each sketch, the pup appeared behind metal bars. A red door loomed behind the cage in every picture. Sometimes the door was ajar. Sometimes it was shut tight. Rachel Parker watched from just beyond the doorway, arms crossed, a mug of untouched tea cooling in her hands. She hadn't slept well. Something about the way Noah talked in his sleep now. It wasn't just nightmares. It was as if someone else was whispering to him. And then there was the voice he used when talking to Echo. Quiet, assuring, adult-like, as if he wasn't just speaking to her, but for her. Dr. Valerie Torres stepped beside Rachel, glancing at the boy and the dog. Valerie looked tired too, her braid now loose around her shoulder, scrubs wrinkled from another overnight shift. But her eyes were alert, watching everything. He keeps drawing that red door, Rachel said. I know, Valerie replied. And the cages. Rachel looked down. He says Echo told him. Valerie sighed. At this point, I'm not sure what to believe. In the back room, Noah reached out and lightly touched Echo's paw. Her ears twitched again, and she let out a soft sound, barely more than a whimper. Noah leaned in closer. I saw it again, he whispered. The red door. You want me to go there, don't you? That afternoon, Rachel took Noah home for a change of clothes. As they stepped into the house, Noah walked directly to the kitchen table and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. Without a word, he began sketching a building, weathered siding, boarded-up windows, and that same red door. But this time, there was a river nearby, drawn in blue crayon with little ripples. Rachel knelt beside him. Where did you see this? Noah shrugged. In Echo's dream. She's still sleeping. But I still see it. Later that evening, as Rachel tucked him into bed, Noah whispered, I need to go there. Where? To the red door. There's a puppy. A little one. She's stuck. And Echo says they forgot about her. Rachel paused. Honey, maybe this is just something you dreamed. Noah shook his head. Echo doesn't dream like me. Her dreams are memories. The next morning, Noah refused to go to school. Instead, he packed a small bag with snacks, his flashlight, and a leash. Rachel found him in the foyer, wearing his winter boots backward and hugging Echo's photo. I'm going, he said calmly. With or without you. Rachel was startled. Her son had never disobeyed like this. She knelt beside him and brushed the hair from his forehead. You have to tell me where this place is, Noah. Even if it's real, I can't take you unless I know where we're going. Noah pointed to the picture. It's near the river, with the big sign that says Sawmill Storage. Echo knows the way. Rachel blinked. Sawmill Storage was a real place, an old supply warehouse by the creek, decommissioned years ago. She had passed it many times, boarded up and forgotten. You've never been there, she murmured. Noah didn't answer. He just looked back at her, completely calm. When Rachel called Valerie, she expected to be dismissed. But the vet's voice on the other end was hesitant. There have been a couple of animal complaints filed near that place in the past. Nothing proven, but Noah's not the first to sense something wrong. Rachel gripped the phone tighter. You believe him? I believe Echo survived 6 months in a wall. I'm open to possibilities. That evening, Rachel reluctantly drove them to the edge of the river. Echo, too weak to walk, rested in the back seat, wrapped in blankets, her head occasionally twitching toward the window as if recognizing the turns in the road. They parked 100 yards from the abandoned warehouse, which sat like a slumped skeleton behind a fence of rusted metal. A faded sign still read Sawmill Storage, no trespassing. The moment the car door opened, Echo stirred and gave the faintest growl, not aggressive but alert. She remembers, Noah said, gripping the leash. She wants to go. Rachel looked at the looming building and then at her son, whose certainty no longer felt childish, it felt ancient. She took a deep breath, tightened her coat, and whispered, "Then let's see what you two remember." The air that night was colder than usual, a sharp wind cutting through Boulder's industrial outskirts as if nature itself wished to keep people away. Snowflakes floated like ashes in the dark, too light to settle, yet too persistent to ignore. Streetlights flickered along the empty sidewalk in front of the Parker house. Inside, all was still, until the soft sound of a door clicking shut whispered into the silence. Noah Parker, bundled in his puffy blue coat and thick boots, stood at the edge of the porch, clutching a flashlight in one hand and Echo's leash in the other. The German shepherd, still frail but walking now with slow, determined steps, stood beside him, her dark eyes locked on the night ahead. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The bond between boy and dog had grown beyond words. Echo moved only when Noah did. And tonight, Noah had made up his mind. He stepped off the porch, guiding her gently past the front gate. It was nearly midnight, and the city slept under a blanket of winter stillness. They had made it halfway down the block when the headlights of an old Buick lit them up from behind. The car rolled slowly to a stop, and a woman leaned out of the window. It was Joanne McAllister, their neighbor from across the street. Joanne was in her early 70s, but carried herself with the energy of a woman half her age. Her silver-gray hair was always pinned in a tight bun, and her expression was perpetually caught between sternness and warmth, like a retired librarian who had seen it all. She had just returned from her part-time shift at the Boulder Public Library. "Noah Parker," she called out, narrowing her eyes. "What in heaven's name are you doing out here at this hour? And with that poor dog?" Noah blinked in the light, then stepped closer. "Mrs. Joanne, we have to go." She showed me. "There's a red door. And puppies behind it." Joanne stared, torn between disbelief and curiosity. Echo looked up at her, ears alert but not aggressive. "I'm not going home," Noah added firmly. "But Echo's too tired to walk far." Joanne sighed, pushed open the passenger door and said, "Get in. But if I end up on the news because of this, I'm blaming you and your psychic mutt." Noah climbed in without hesitation. Echo followed, curling quietly in the back seat. As Joanne drove, he gave directions, not like a child guessing, but like someone retracing familiar steps. They passed warehouses, frozen parking lots, and vacant delivery bays until they reached the edge of Boulder Creek, where the city's old fish processing plants had long been left to rot. "There," Noah whispered, pointing. Joanne parked, engine still running. In front of them stood a derelict building half swallowed by snowdrifts and vines. Most windows were boarded shut, and its brick facade had cracked from years of neglect. But one detail stood out unmistakably, the tall, chipped red steel door at the center of the structure. Joanne squinted. "You're telling me there's a dog in there?" Noah nodded. "More than one." Echo let out a low, rumbling whine. Joanne sighed again, grabbed a heavy flashlight from the glove box, and said, "Well, I didn't get to be 72 by ignoring my instincts. Let's go." The trio crossed the snow-covered lot cautiously. The red door, rusted but intact, creaked open under Joanne's push. The inside was dark and musty, filled with the scent of rot, old fish, and something else, foul like decay and fear. Noah clung to Echo's leash and moved ahead without hesitation. Echo's nose twitched wildly, her pace picking up as they moved through what used to be the central processing room. Crates and broken machinery were stacked haphazardly. Rats skittered away as they passed. And then they heard it. A bark. Muffled. Desperate. Echo growled softly. Noah pulled her toward the sound. At the back of the building, behind what used to be a storage wall, they found a heavy metal gate slightly ajar. Joanne swung it open with effort. Inside were cages. 6 of them. Each held a dog. One of them, a small brindle-coated pup, jumped against the bars with a weak yelp, tail wagging despite the filth. Another, a scarred pit bull, watched them with wary, sunken eyes. "Oh my God," Joanne whispered. A sudden noise made them freeze. Footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Joanne grabbed Noah's hand. "We're not alone." They ducked behind a stack of crates, just as 2 figures entered the room through a back entrance. One was a burly man in a leather jacket with a chain in hand. The other, thinner and taller, wore a black hoodie and carried a flashlight. "I told you to check the locks," the tall one hissed. "If these mutts get out again," they didn't. "Maybe it was the wind. You want to bet your neck on it? We got 3 more fights booked this week." Noah's eyes widened. He looked up at Joanne. "Dog fights." She squeezed his hand tighter. "I know." Echo didn't move. Her body had gone rigid, eyes locked on the men. Then, unexpectedly, Echo stepped forward from their hiding place and let out a deep, piercing bark. It echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot. The 2 men froze. "What the hell?" Joanne grabbed Noah and bolted for the door. Echo didn't follow. She lunged at the thugs, forcing them to retreat. Her barks turned savage, louder than her frail body should have allowed. Outside, Joanne rushed Noah into the car and slammed the door. She fumbled for her phone, dialed 911, and barked at the operator. Animal cruelty ring. "Red Door Warehouse on Riverbend. Get here now. And send animal control." Minutes later, sirens began to wail in the distance. Inside, Echo staggered back to the doorway as the men escaped through the rear exit. She limped out just as officers arrived. Noah ran to her, threw his arms around her neck. "You did it," he whispered. Echo licked his cheek and collapsed against him, exhausted but triumphant. Red and blue lights sliced through the winter darkness as the first police cruisers skidded to a halt in front of the abandoned fish factory. Snow whirled in gusts around the flood of uniforms that poured from the vehicles, their boots crunching over ice as radios crackled orders. Officer Jeremy Brooks, a tall man in his early 30s with a square jaw and a quick temper dulled by years of field duty, took the lead. He glanced around the decrepit grounds, flashlight raised, eyes narrowing as he spotted Joanne McAllister waving them down with urgency. "There!" Joanne called out, her gray bun unraveling, cheeks flushed from the cold and adrenaline. "The kid and the dog are still inside. Be careful, they're armed." Noah stood just behind her, arms wrapped around Echo, who was now lying in the snow-covered lot just beyond the red door. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her paws twitching with exhaustion and pain. Despite her condition, her eyes remained locked on the building, as though daring the danger to come again. Officer Brooks nodded and motioned for his team to move in. Inside the building, the remaining thugs, caught mid-escape, barely had time to react before the flashlights and shouts hit them like a wave. One tried to slip through a back stairwell, only to find himself face first in the snow with handcuffs locking around his wrists. The other surrendered in silence, cornered in the cage room, arms raised beside a stack of dog crates. The animals, though battered and terrified, responded to the disruption with a strange quiet, as if even they sensed hope had finally arrived. As paramedics and animal control followed closely behind, Rachel Parker's SUV screeched into the parking lot, barely stopping before she threw the door open and ran toward Noah. Her face, pale with panic and worry, was streaked with tears that froze instantly in the bitter wind. She dropped to her knees beside him and Echo. "Oh my God, baby," she gasped, wrapping Noah in her arms. "What were you thinking?" "She showed me," Noah said softly, his face half buried in her coat. "And there's one more inside. She's sick." Rachel looked up as Valerie Torres pulled into the scene moments later in her beat-up green Subaru. The vet's usual calm was shaken, her hands trembling slightly as she grabbed her medical bag and hurried toward Echo. How long's she been like this? Valerie asked, kneeling beside the German shepherd. She wouldn't leave Noah, Joan said, arms crossed, trying to catch her breath. She stood between him and that thug like she was 10 feet tall. Never seen anything like it. Valerie pressed her stethoscope to Echo's chest, nodding slowly. Still strong, but she's pushed herself past the limit. We need to get her warm and hydrated. Then came a cry from inside the building. A volunteer with animal control called out from the far corner. Dr. Torres, we've got one back here. Valerie grabbed her bag again and ran. They found her in the last cage, a trembling ball of pale fur with eyes too big for her shrunken face. The puppy was barely more than skin and bones, her breathing shallow, her hind leg twisted unnaturally beneath her. Noah peered beside them, clutching Rachel's hand. His voice barely rose above a whisper. That's her. That's Hope. The puppy's ears perked slightly at the name, and her eyes blinked slowly. Valerie reached in gently and scooped her up, cradling the frail creature in her arms. She's malnourished, feverish, possibly a fracture, she said. But she's still in there. Barely. I want you to help her, Noah said. Like you helped Echo. Valerie looked at him for a long moment. That's not a small thing to ask. She's not a small thing, Noah replied. Officer Brooks, now standing nearby with arms crossed over his bulletproof vest, looked between the child, the dog, and the vet. Kid's got a point. That little one's got a name now. Hope was rushed into Valerie's car, nestled in heated blankets, with oxygen administered by a paramedic who looked more used to working with humans than puppies. Meanwhile, the police processed the scene. Evidence gathered, suspects restrained, photographs taken. The illegal dog-fighting operation, hidden in plain sight for over a year, was finally dismantled. As dawn approached, Rachel, Joanne, Valerie, and Noah stood beside Echo, who had been gently loaded into the back of the clinic van alongside the pup. Snow was still falling, but now the light in the sky held a warm hue, soft orange blooming behind the clouds. Joanne placed a hand on Rachel's shoulder. He saved them all, you know. Rachel looked down at her son, who was now resting against her side, eyelids heavy with exhaustion but heart wide awake. No, they saved each other. Officer Brooks, leaning against his cruiser, smiled faintly as he scribbled the last of his notes. I've worked 32 cases this year. None of them started with a 5-year-old and a half-dead dog. Guess there's a first time for everything. Valerie returned from the van and gave a quick nod. Echo will need weeks, maybe months. Hope we'll see. But I'll do everything I can. Noah smiled softly. She'll make it. I know she will. And for the first time in a long while, the world didn't seem quite so cold. The snow had finally stopped falling in Boulder. It was March now, and though the streets still bore slushy reminders of winter's last breath, hints of spring crept into the air. A softer sun, a chirping bird, the scent of thawing earth. At the Blue Ridge Veterinary Clinic, the air was filled not with the sterile chill of antiseptic, but the warm scent of hay, lavender, and healing. Hope, the once fragile pup Noah had found behind the red door, lay curled in a heated basket by the window, her soft white fur now fuller, with a distinctive patch over her left eye like a painted teardrop. Her ribs no longer jetted sharply. Her breath came strong and even. At only 4 months old, she still limped slightly from the damage in her hind leg, but her tail wagged vigorously whenever she saw her boy. Noah Parker had been visiting daily. He sat beside her basket now, speaking softly, stroking her ears while Echo watched from a short distance, head resting on her front paws. Echo had recovered miraculously, her coat glossy, posture proud once more. Though she bore the calmness of a dog who had seen too much, there was a peace in her amber eyes when she looked at Noah, her person. Valerie Torres entered the room quietly, clipboard in hand. The vet wore jeans under her lab coat and sneakers worn from long shifts, her thick black curls pulled back today in a braid that trailed between her shoulders. She smiled gently at the scene before her. She's nearly ready to go home, Valerie said softly, looking at Rachel, who stood nearby with her arms crossed, watching her son. Rachel had changed too. The worry that once pulled her shoulders in and kept her mouth tight had given way to a steadier calm. Her dark blonde hair, usually in a bun, hung loose today, and her eyes, though still guarded, were brighter. "Really?" Rachel asked. "Another week or so to be sure," Valerie said, crouching beside the basket. Hope leaned into her hand as she checked the pup's vitals. "She's responding better than I expected. Honestly, I think she started fighting because of him." Rachel turned to see Noah whispering to Hope. "What are you telling her?" she asked. Noah shrugged, then looked at Valerie. "I told her she's safe now. I told her the girl didn't want to hurt her. The girl gave her water." Valerie froze. "What girl?" "The one with the scar on her chin," Noah said. "She talked to Hope through the bars. She said sorry. She called her Luna before. She said she wasn't supposed to be nice, but she was." Rachel knelt next to him. "Honey, where did you hear that?" Noah tapped his temple. "Echo saw it. And Hope remembers. She was crying when the girl left." Valerie's expression shifted, something between awe and concern. "Do you think you could draw her for me, Noah?" He nodded and took out his sketch pad. Within minutes, he had drawn a thin girl, maybe 12 or 13, with long black hair tucked under a hoodie, and a faint scar tracing her chin. She held a water bottle through metal bars and looked back over her shoulder nervously. Rachel and Valerie exchanged a glance. The girl's expression was unmistakably kind. Valerie made a call. Within the hour, Officer Jeremy Brooks arrived at the clinic, still in uniform, the snow melting off his boots. He was carrying a folder and wore his usual skeptical frown. "Kid's got a good memory," he said after flipping through the sketch. "We had one girl who fit this. Sophie Reyes. Name came up in the case paperwork, but she disappeared during the raid. Thought she'd run. Daughter of Luis Reyes, head of the operation. She'd never been officially arrested." Rachel's heart clenched. "You think she helped the dogs?" "Could be," Brooks said. "Or she could be another victim of her father's system. These guys kept their families scared and silent. She might have wanted out." Rachel looked at Valerie. "We have to find her." Brooks nodded. "I'll reopen her profile. Put out a non-criminal welfare alert. If she helped that dog, she deserves more than to be lost in the system." That night, as Noah slept curled beside Echo on the living room rug, Rachel watched them from the sofa, hand gripping a cup of tea gone cold. The fireplace crackled softly. The home that had once echoed with uncertainty now felt rooted, held together by things not seen but deeply felt. Valerie called the next morning with news. "We might have found her." She had been spotted near an old library downtown, sleeping in a community shed with other runaway kids. A social worker brought her in. Sophie Reyes was 13, small for her age, with hollow cheeks and guarded eyes. She wore a denim jacket 2 sizes too large and refused to speak to anyone, until Valerie brought Hope. At the clinic, Sophie sat on the floor, knees tucked to her chest, staring blankly. Hope, still on a leash, limped toward her and sat down gently, tail thumping once against the floor. Sophie's lips parted slightly. She reached out. "Luna," she whispered. Hope whined and nudged her hand. The silence in the room broke. Sophie began to cry. The wind in Boulder had softened. Spring had finally arrived, bringing with it the scent of lilacs and warm soil. Trees bloomed along the streets in a soft pink haze, and the air held that brief, delicate magic that made people believe in new beginnings. On the outskirts of town, just past a field where dandelions swayed like tiny suns, a new building stood, modest, hopeful, painted the color of sky after rain. Above the entrance, in bold silver letters, it read, "Echo's Voice Animal Rescue and Healing Center." Inside, the place bustled with quiet purpose. Volunteers moved with practiced care, soothing crates of trembling dogs, changing blankets, wiping bowls. The lobby walls were painted with children's drawings, dogs with wings, smiling suns, and above them all, a painting of a large German shepherd with amber eyes, Echo. The rescue center had been Rachel's idea. After everything her family had endured and witnessed, she'd looked at Michael one morning and said, "We have to do something that lasts." It was Valerie who secured the grant, with a letter campaign that brought attention from Boulder officials and national nonprofits. And it was Noah, now 6, who gave it its name. He and Echo were inseparable. Every afternoon after school, he sat with her under the big oak outside their house, or at the new rescue's therapy room, reading stories aloud or just resting his small hand on her fur. Echo had become an official therapy dog, certified by the state, but to Noah, she was more than that. She was the guardian of his dreams. At the rescue center, a small private room had been arranged for Sophie Reyes and Hope. Sophie had been placed under protective care, her father sentenced in court, and her role as a whistleblower ensured she would never be charged. Her adjustment had been slow. She barely spoke for weeks, but with Hope at her side, she was healing. The scars on her arms, once hidden beneath long sleeves, now peeked out without shame. Hope followed her everywhere, never leaving more than a foot between them. Sophie, at 13, was wiry with restless limbs and deep brown eyes that looked older than her years. She'd started painting on the rescue center's walls, mural-sized dogs with gold halos and flowing streams. Valerie had helped enroll her in art therapy, and now she smiled more days than not. One late afternoon, as the sun fell low and golden over the rooftops of Boulder, a small gathering took place in front of the center. The mayor had come to dedicate the space officially, but the crowd wasn't there for politics. They came for the boy with the dog. Noah Parker stood in front of the podium, wearing a pale blue shirt that Rachel had ironed twice that morning. His hair was windswept, his shoes untied, and Echo sat beside him, head high, her coat gleaming. A microphone was adjusted for him, but he didn't speak. Instead, he took Echo's leash, led her to the middle of the stage, and looked at her. She looked back. The crowd, silent and breath-held, watched as Noah placed his hand on Echo's head and whispered something. She barked once, soft, sure. "That's all," Noah said, stepping back. The room broke into applause. The media had taken to calling him the dog listener. Articles had run in local papers and online blogs. The boy who heard beyond the wall. The German shepherd who waited in silence, healing in Boulder. But the Parkers turned down every book deal, every talk show. This wasn't for fame. It was for the ones who couldn't speak. That evening, as twilight curled across the sky, Rachel and Michael sat on the front porch of their home with Valerie, cups of tea in hand. Sophie and Hope were inside baking cookies, while burning them and laughing. It was the first time they'd heard Sophie laugh loudly. And Noah sat with Echo at the edge of the porch, his legs crossed, her chin on his knee. He looked up at the sky. "Mom," he called without turning. "Echo says the stars sound different tonight." Rachel smiled softly. "What do they sound like?" "Like peace," he said. "Like they're finally quiet." The grown-ups didn't answer, just sat in silence as fireflies blinked between the bushes. The house behind them glowed warm through the windows, filled with the scent of cookies too far gone, but made with joy. Inside the quiet of the moment, Echo shifted. Her breath was steady, slow. Her eyes, once always alert, were soft now, almost drowsy. And as the sun dipped behind the mountains and twilight bathed them in silver, she nudged Noah's hand once more and closed her eyes. He rested his head against her. No words passed between them. They didn't need any. Some miracles don't come with a loud clap of thunder or a flash of light. They come quietly, like the faint breathing behind a brick wall, like the eyes of a dog who never gives up hope, or like the heart of a child pure enough to hear what adults have forgotten. The silent cries of souls in need of love. The story of Noah, Echo, and Hope is more than just a rescue mission. It's proof that God never turns his eyes away from those who are most vulnerable. He doesn't always show up in bright lights sometimes. He shows up in a dog buried in cement, in a little girl who's been hurt, or in the innocent heart of a child willing to believe what no one else does. We live in a world full of noise, but if we listen, we will find that God is still whispering in the simplest moments. The sound of rain, the barking of a dog, or the eyes of a stranger in need. If this story has touched your heart, please share it with your loved ones. Comment Amen if you believe that God always has a good plan for every living being, no matter how small. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to watch the next stories of hope, of faith, and of miracles that only happen when we still believe in good things. May God bless you and your family. Amen.